And so today we have two speakers with us. It's our two newest members of the executive committee. So we have Siobhan and Marcia, and I will let them introduce themselves a little bit more when they're giving their presentations. I think we've mentioned this in the past. Nadja Wolf from the World Youth Alliance left us. That makes it sound like she died. She took another job. She's very much alive and well. She took another job and with the mission of the Holy See to the United Nations. And so by definition, she does not represent an NGO anymore. And so therefore cannot be a member of the NGO committee. And her replacement from WIA is Siobhan. And then we also have Marcia, who thanks to Zoom, and thanks to social distancing, we've been able to get involved in the committee. Marcia's been a supporter of the committee for many, many years, but she's based in Arizona. And so it's good that we're able to expand beyond the borders of New York for a broader membership. So Marcia is our newest board member at large. And so today, I think we flipped a coin before this presentation began. But Marcia is going to go first, followed by Siobhan, and they are going to talk about their family traditions, the role of traditions in their families. They're each going to take about 10 minutes or so, 10 to 15 minutes. Actually, Marcia told me she's going to take 45 minutes.
6.5 minutes exactly.
But we're going to get a chance to hear from each of them for a little bit, and we'll take it to that point. So Marcia, if you want to share your screen.
Okay.
We'll go from there.
We practice this, so let's see if I can pull it off. All right, all right, here we go. It's really fun to be here and have some friends to share some history with. Everyone can see Ben? Ryan, is it coming through okay? All right. My husband Greg and I grew up in rural Idaho, farm kids, as they say. Some of the first in our family to graduate from college. We started our life together in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we've spent the last 35 years in Arizona. Both these locations were very different environments than our years growing up in Idaho. Here's a winter scene of the home where I grew up and a scene looking out from the kitchen window. And this is the photo today of our backyard here in Arizona. It's a little bit different. That difference was profound for me at first, and our family's Christmas traditions have been an effort to blend those two quite different worlds. During my childhood, aside from the normal activities associated with Christmas morning, we had animals to feed and chores to take care of. The herd of Black Angus cows had to be fed, and when the snow was deep, that was accomplished via a hay slip or a sled that resembles the slide in this drawing, except the platform of that sled was down on the ground so you could slide the hay off. Now, more often than not, we used a tractor to pull that hay slip, not a horse, but sometimes a draft animal was actually required. In addition to the hours spent playing in the backyard, Christmas afternoon brought with it neighbors with their children who would gather in an open field with various forms of sleds for a few hours of fun. I had to look for photos that kind of resembled what would come. It was all sorts of sleds pulled by horses, pulled by snow machines, snowmobiles, various things. So one of the favorite sleds was an old car hood turned upside down and hooked up behind the tractor. I cringe some now as I remember that the tractor driver's assignment was to make sharp turns and swerves so as to throw the children off the makeshift sled and into the snow. Today, the closest thing we come to that Christmas Day tradition is to hook up our flatbed trailer to an SUV, line it with borrowed straw bales for seats, and drive through the neighborhood looking at Christmas lights while enjoying hot chocolate. Part of my assignment today was to mention a tradition that centered around a food. So the food-related tradition I'd like to share has its roots when my husband Greg was about 10 years old, and his father, who had injured his back in a farming accident, had surgery that had put him in a body cast for about 7 months. There was little to no safety net for Greg's parents and their 5 children. Greg's mom supported the family by sewing drapes. Life itself, let alone Christmas, was bleak that year. The only gift that the family had that Christmas was a box of food and miscellaneous small gifts that were left at the front door by the Blaisdells, a family that lived a few miles down the road. Each of the food items in that box was individually wrapped, probably by a child, with bright Christmas paper. Every single can of food and every single potato was wrapped carefully and placed in a newspaper-lined cardboard box. That box of small gifts was the only gift Greg's family had that Christmas, and they were grateful for it. He never forgot that generous gift, and particularly that every single potato had been wrapped. But the gift grew more in stature when Greg, years later, realized that the Blaisdells had little more in terms of financial resources in his own family. That box left on their doorstep represented a remarkable sacrifice. When Greg and I married and our children were old enough to do simple gift wrapping, we started a tradition where the first of each December, we would purchase a box of potatoes and we would wrap each one of them and place them under our Christmas tree. We would then discuss who we would invite to Christmas dinner. Come Christmas morning, unwrapping each of those potatoes became an important part of our celebration. Later in the day, we would peel the potatoes, boil them, and whip them into those famous Idaho potatoes, mashed, of course. Then we'd sit down to a dinner with the individual or family who had joined us to make our Christmas complete. The Blaisdells' gift to Greg's family has continued to bless our family and others. Those Christmas wrapped potatoes have taught our family perspective, that simple gifts can have great meaning, to be aware of others who might not have resources or are simply alone, that you actually don't need much to be content, and finally, to always appreciate what we have. And thank you for letting me share some thoughts, and Merry Christmas. There's those potatoes.
That was so nice. Hey, so can we ask you a couple questions before Siobhan takes her turn?
Sure.
So there's a couple things. Were you in any of those pictures? Like, is that
No,
you?
no. As it turns out, both my parents have been gone for 20 years and over 20 years, and we held on to the farm until just a few years ago. And my nephew bought the home, and so it's still in our family. So you can see that the kids were my nephew's children.
Yeah.
So, but the snow deep, I called him Joel, is his name, and I said, Joel, find me the pictures of snow around the house. So that's how I got the photos.
And so the cows, that's not a historical photo either. But
No, but that, and as I went looking for photos, because we didn't have digital cameras back then, every photo was precious. So I couldn't, but I spent lots of time looking for a photo that would resemble what it was. So those were the closest I could come to what it would look like. Those Black Angus, and by the way, they're very mean. Black Angus are known for being mean, but they liked you because you were bringing them food. So yeah, the hay bales would just slide off the back of the slip. So it was perfect when you hook that hay slip up to a tractor or a horse. Horse obviously didn't go as fast, but you could get thrown off into the snow. And that was the whole point of what we were trying to do, even with the car hood. It's a great.
Were there any like serious injuries?
No.
And I'm sorry I'm monopolizing the question time, but I'm really curious about the potatoes. So 2 things with the potatoes. One, do they ever like sprout eyes while they're wrapped underneath the tree for a while?
Oh, no, no. Potatoes are really hardy. Most of the potatoes that you are eating right now, like even in April and May, have been stored in a potato cellar since last fall, the fall prior.
And the second one is, have your kids adopted that tradition?
Some of them have. Yeah, some of them have. And I will tell you, mashed potatoes are a big deal in our family. It's almost blasphemy if you don't like potatoes. So, and we don't ever, I was telling Wendy, we don't ever eat instant potatoes. No. And it has to be the real deal.
That's funny. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or are we good?
Well, thanks for your kindness in listening to me. That was fun.
Thank you so much, Marcia. And so then, if you want to turn off your screen share, we'll turn the laptop this way. And so we'll get Siobhan.
Hi, everyone. I think I know most of you, but there might be one or two of you that I haven't been formally introduced to. So my name is Siobhan Heekin-Canedy. I represent World Youth Alliance, as Ryan mentioned, on the executive committee of the NGO Committee on the Family. If you haven't heard of it, WYA is a global coalition of young people who work to uphold human dignity through advocacy, education, and culture. Just a little bit about me. I was born in California, but grew up in Connecticut, still live in Connecticut. I figure skated for a long time, did that competitively, later went to college, grad school.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, if you want.
She did that competitively. She was an Olympian. She is an Olympian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did that competitively makes it sound like she participated in the West Orange Skating Classic. No, she a world class level athlete. Yeah. Well, sorry if that embarrasses you.
So that's a whole different story, but definitely an amazing experience. And yeah, after that, I got a Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Arts and a Master's in International Affairs. And that's what brought me here. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about this kind of struggle of figuring out this whole family tradition thing in the context of marriage. I think it's maybe ironic that I'm speaking on this topic, for one thing, because I've only been married 2 years. And I know I'm speaking to a group that, many of you have been married for over a decade or maybe multiple decades. It is maybe particularly ironic because pretty much the whole time I've been married has been spent during the COVID pandemic. I was married in December of 2019, so I like to say I got married and the world fell apart, essentially. No causal relationship there whatsoever. But I think this has been a time where for most people, it's felt like tradition has really been upended, and even thinking about maintaining the traditions we were used to has been difficult. Another reason that it's a little ironic is my now husband, and I got off to a bit of an inauspicious start when it came to melding our family traditions. When we started dating back in college, I think it was just within the first few weeks after we started dating, that my husband informed me that the tradition in his family, which he planned to uphold, was to name the first son Michael Francis, the second son Thomas Edmund, the third son Martin Ignatius, the fourth son Joseph Dominic, and so on and so on. He's the oldest of 9 children, 6 of whom are boys. I don't remember exactly what my reaction was, but I think it was probably something along the lines of, so if we get married, all my sons are already named, and how many are you planning on having? So as you can see, it got off to a bit of a rocky start. And as you can also see from the story, tradition runs very strong in my husband's family. And I think in the early years of our relationship, he sometimes took this to a bit of an extreme. He was maybe a little rigid in how he interpreted this idea of passing on family tradition, and is very self-aware of his attachment to tradition. He would often talk about it by name. I, on the other hand, came from a family where I don't think we really talked about family tradition as such very often. And I never grew up with a sense of expectation that I had to continue our traditions after I was married or pass them on to my children. So as you can imagine, this led to some disagreements. But the interesting thing is that over the time we've been together, I've come to realize that I also grew up with a very strong attachment to family tradition. What else would you call the baptismal gown that's been worn by, well, what had been worn by 4 and now 5 generations in my family? the graham cracker cake recipe that my grandfather's grandmother baked for him every birthday. My mom had it for all of her birthdays. I've now had it for pretty much all my birthdays, and my 14-month-old daughter just had it for her first birthday. What else would you call the annual family trips to Mystic, Connecticut, or to Jones Tree Farm to chop down our own Christmas tree? Or the custom of receiving a ring, or in my case, I requested a charm for my charm bracelet with the Robson family crest. That's one of the family branches, I guess, in my mom's side of the family, for your 16th birthday. So looking back, I started to realize that I'm also very strongly grounded in my own family traditions. I maybe just am less vocal about it, or had a tendency to think about it less. So the good news is I'd already started to realize this, and my husband Mike had already become a little bit more flexible in his interpretation of family tradition by the time we got married. So not to say that there hasn't been any adjustment to make, but I think we got through the worst of it before we got married. Currently, there are no plans for a Thomas Edmund, a Martin Ignatius, etc. Although I think if our first child had been a boy, it turned out to be a girl, but if she'd been a boy, she probably would have been Michael Francis. So a little bit of compromise there. Another beautiful thing I've noticed is that my husband's attachment to family tradition has actually made him more open to adopting my own family's traditions, because he really loves the idea of our daughter growing up with a strong sense of tradition coming from both sides of her family. We've also been creating traditions of our own. So this is only our second Christmas married. We were actually, so we're both Catholic, so we have a tendency to refer to the 8 days from Christmas onwards as the octave of Christmas. So within our own tradition, we say we were married during the octave of Christmas on December 28th, which is kind of a tradition in itself, I guess, that we can celebrate our anniversary as part of that Christmas celebration every year. So this is only our second Christmas together as a married couple. And last year we learned about an Icelandic tradition. And I know I'm going to mispronounce this. I'm sorry if any of you speak Icelandic, but something like Jólabókaflóð, which apparently literally means book flood. And if you're interested, you can just look it up online, right? Icelandic Book Exchange, and you'll find all sorts of blog posts and things. And basically Icelanders buy tons of books. There's a fun history behind that I won't get into, but they buy lots of books in the months leading up to Christmas, and then they exchange them as gifts on Christmas Eve and just cozy up and read quietly the rest of the evening. So last year we decided to adopt this as our own family tradition, partly as a nod to the fact that we spent our honeymoon in Iceland and really loved it. Highly recommend it if you ever want to go. And also, well, also it just sounds fun, frankly, if you like reading books as I do. And finally, as a way of instilling in our daughter an idea that reading is really important, and, you know, making that into a fun tradition where she could really look forward to getting a book and, you know, curling up with it. I have my doubts about how that's going to work this year. She is getting more interested in books, but, you know, they tend to be upside down, and she, you know, sticks with one for maybe 10 seconds before she moves on. So we'll see how that goes. So I think we're still navigating this balance between creating new traditions, sticking with the traditions we each grew up with, compromising when those come into conflict. One example is in my husband's family, the tradition was to wait until Christmas Eve to decorate the tree, whereas in my family, we would usually decorate the beginning of December. So as a compromise, we're kind of experimenting with decorating little by little in the days or weeks leading up to Christmas, but then waiting to put the finishing touches on or put the angel tree topper on Christmas Eve. So I'm sure we'll continue to form new traditions and incorporate old ones as our daughter grows older, as we hopefully grow our family. And yeah, we'll see how that unfolds. But I also wanted to talk to you a little bit about the bigger picture, because I know we show up at these meetings each month, not just to share personal anecdotes and eat cookies, even though that's really, really fun. But everyone who's here really cares deeply about global policy and issues, and particularly as those pertain to family. So I wanted to try to tie these remarks into that bigger picture a little bit. I think my remarks so far might seem a little out of place at first in a venue where we often talk about huge issues like global fertility rates or the UN Third Committee or the intersection of family and technology. But I think for me, what really kind of sums up the way that what I've been talking about this whole time intersects with these larger issues is a quote from Mother Teresa. And apparently, unfortunately, it's actually a misquote. Apparently she was paraphrased. It's one of those things where you hear it said by the person, turns out it wasn't, but I think the sentiment is sound. And she said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And for me, this means that the little daily actions that we perform within the context of our families, whether our nuclear families or more extended families, in their own way, I think those are as important for global peace and flourishing as UN resolutions or international treaties. I think family traditions in particular can be really important for passing on the best that a culture has to offer, passing on the wisdom of previous generations. They can give families a sense of stability, even amidst change, even amidst global pandemics, maybe. In the midst of intense suffering sometimes. And they can also be a way for family members to show each other that they love each other and to pass that love on from generation to generation. I hadn't even planned to share this story, but I was just remembering when I was little, my grandfather used to read us a short, I'm an only child of my parents. So myself and my parents, a short story, I think it was by Truman Capote, that called The Thanksgiving Visitor. And we never got through the story. We'd always start it and it was a little too long for my attention span. So we never finished it. So this year, my grandfather is still alive and he lives not too far from us. And he came over and my daughter now is his great granddaughter, and he read the beginning of the story for us. So our goal is to have it finished by Christmas, to finally finish that story, but that tradition is getting passed on. It's a way of him showing his love for now the next generation. But back to the sort of macro picture. Even though we're always talking or always hearing about plummeting fertility rates, plummeting marriage rates, the reality is that an awful lot of people still get married and still have kids. So the reality is that the way they navigate this issue of blending their family cultures or creating their own family culture is still going to have repercussions on culture within a community, a country, and even in the world at large. And I think will have that impact in a smaller way and maybe a hidden way, but does have that impact on the big picture of global flourishing. So to sum up, the task that my husband and I are facing, incorporating our own backgrounds and also creating a new and unique family culture, is a perennial one. I think it's been faced by every generation so far and will be faced by every generation to come. It's not always easy, but its impact is really crucial. And in its own way, it also has the potential to change the world. So thank you.